We see sex depicted every day in TV and movies. Steamy shows can be a guilty pleasure, often because we find these characters and their lives relatable. Today, our medical advisory board members, Dr. Cheryl Iglesia, Dr. Christine Vaccaro, and Dr. Sheryl Kingsberg, will talk about our favorite sexy shows and movies and how these shows can help fuel healthy conversations about sex with our partners and even with children and teens.
Welcome to Sex Care is Self-Care, a conversation for women's sexual health brought to you by the Patty Brisbane Foundation for Women's Sexual Health. I'm your host, Patty Brisbane. Today we're talking about some of our favorite shows that have some steamy, sexy elements. We're here to discuss and find out why these shows are so relatable and how they can be educational for adults and teens. I am joined here with some of with our esteemed board members, and so I'm going to start with Dr. Sheryl Kingsberg. I'm going to have you start and introduce yourself, and what do you do on a daily basis?
My name is Sheryl Kingsberg. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and besides having the honor of sitting on your medical board, I am the chief of a division of behavioral medicine in OBGYN at University Hospitals Cleveland Medical Center. I'm also a professor in reproductive biology and psychiatry because they all should cover sexuality. At Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. On a daily basis, I see mostly women with all kinds of women's health concerns, so that anybody in women's health can refer them to me, because you would be crazy if you had no place to go to talk about sexual concerns, whether it be menopause, infertility, or female sexual dysfunction.
There you go. Christine?
Hello there. I'm Christine Vaccaro, and my background is I've got fellowship trained and double board certified in urogynecology, as well as obstetrics and gynecology. And I'm currently the fellowship director for urogynecology and also an associate professor of obstetrics and gynecology in Bethesda, Maryland. And what I do on a daily basis is train the next generation of urogynecologists and OBGYNs with a focus on pelvic floor disorders and sexual pain. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Hi, good morning. Cheryl Iglesia here. I am the head of urogynecology for MedStar Health, and I am also double board certified in OBGYN and urology, and I hold an academic position because we train a lot of medical students, residents, and fellows. I'm a professor of OBGYN and urology at Georgetown University School of Medicine in Washington, D.C. On a daily basis, like we just make vaginas better. We do a lot of pelvic floor disorders, but I do a lot of reconstructive pelvic surgery. That's like kind of like my passion, and educating women on what's going on down there. That's why I love working with you, Patty.
But that's why I'm just always so honored when I get to be with you and discuss openly these topics. So thank you so much, all of you, for taking time today, because a lot of women are going to benefit from our conversation. So let's get started. Are any of you watching any steamy streaming shows going on right now?
I'm going to give a disclaimer, Patty. Number one, a lot of what I'm about to say is my personal opinion, not necessarily medically per se, but my steamy list, and some of these are new and some of these are old, includes Outlander, Poldark, and Bridgerton. And the reason I love these is because these shows have extremely handsome male leads, but also really strong female leads. So that's a win-win for me. But I do want to just make sure this point is clear, because if you hear nothing else from this podcast, please know that these shows are very steamy and they mostly portray the ideal sexual chemistry and physical chemistry and romance and connection.
Yes.
So basically, it's a lot of fantasy, and real life is much different. So I'm actually going to briefly talk about the shows that I like that are based more in reality and I think are more relatable with people with common sexual problems. So if you don't mind, I'm going to digress a little bit.
No, go.
And I ranked these because, who doesn't like a good ranking, right? So I'm going to start with the top one, which is what you've already mentioned, Sex Education on Netflix. This is a socially awkward high school student, Otis, who gets bits and pieces of guidance on sex from his mom, who is a sex therapist. And then he basically becomes a sexpert to his peers and sets up an underground sex therapy clinic with his classmates.
With Maeve.
This show, for me, just really shines. It highlights so many sexual problems of various ages, anything from sexual aversion to LGBTQIA+. It is rated TV mature, so like you mentioned, your granddaughter, I recommend watching this first before potentially watching it with your teen or older adult or young adult, and also just great character development, and Dr. Milburn's jumpsuits are lovely. I always enjoy all her outfits. My number 2 show is Sex Life, which I'm going to hold my comments for because I think we're going to focus on that later in the podcast. And number 3 is Sex in the City, which is like the original. I feel like, it was originally on HBO. I think now you can stream it on Hulu, but the series of, 4 women in their 30s and 40s sharing their sexual experiences in New York City. And I feel like this really pushed sexual positivity to the forefront, mainly because Samantha, who's extremely sexually confident, explores nearly anything and everything. But also there's other episodes, like there's one with Charlotte who touches on a pain disorder. There's a scene where she's talking with her gynecologist, and actually the word vulvodynia was actually on the show, which I was really impressed. And then even with Samantha, who's very sexually confident, in one episode, she lost the ability to orgasm, which is called secondary anorgasmia. And she uses all sorts of sexual toys to help herself. So this episode really, again, sort of destigmatized use of sexual toys. So bottom line, is just extremely sex positive. It is kind of, the OG, as my kids like to say, but it is like the original, I feel like, sex positive show. It normalizes sexual exploration and sexual dysfunctions in both men and women. And then very lastly, I just have to highlight one of my other favorites, which is the movie Hysteria. This is rated R. It was released in 2011. And it's basically historical fiction. And the reason I love it is because it actually goes through the whole story of the invention of the vibrator. So basically one of the doctors was getting arthritis from manually stimulating women to the point of orgasm, and apparently the late 1800s was a treatment for menopausal symptoms, aka hysteria. So it's definitely worth a watch. And I'll stop hogging the show, but I'm so excited about this podcast.
That's awesome. Anybody else want to add to that?
Cheryl, you want to go? I'll go last.
Okay, well, I don't know. I'm going to need to binge watch some of these shows that you're recommending, Christine. And I'll just be honest, I probably am a little bit more of a dilettante. So I have watched episodes of Outlander. My husband loved it when I watched that because it kind of makes you like want to be a little bit more exciting than you typically are. He's like, but I haven't watched Sex Ed or Sex Life. Of course, I've watched Sex in the City, and I watch a lot of movies. And, there are a lot of movies. Like one of the ones I watched recently was Good Luck to You, Leo Grande, which was about Emma Thompson, who's a widow, but had a very conservative husband, and ended up like renting a sex worker to teach her the ropes. And I thought it's very relatable. Anyway, because I think people, want to go outside the norms, and these kinds of movies and shows, I think they're giving people permission to like experiment. There's a lot more that you can do than the typical missionary position and the typical night and the typical place, blah, blah, blah. So I like that kind of the fact that this is on prime time and we've got more, really exciting and educational shows out there is really useful.
So let me change in a little bit of a direction, which is necessary, which is nope, not well. Christine mentioned it a little bit, but I like the L word. Anybody said the L word?
Well, there's a lot of L words. Are we going
So
lust or love?
the L word is for lesbian. That was with Jennifer Beals. So how could you not want to think about how beautiful Jennifer Beals is? And that was a series that was on, probably in the 90s. It came back again just recently for another few seasons. And it's really kind of the soap opera Love and Lust in a LA lesbian scene. And what I like about it is, number one, again, you have a sexual minority, because most of it, as Christine was talking about, how could you not fall for all these beautiful men? Well, not everybody is straight. Number two, in the L word, not only is it really about lesbian affairs, and think about the fact that with women, love and lust is really about the intimacy and the story, which is why many women prefer reading erotica than seeing it. It's not really about sex as much as the chase and the seduction. And so those storylines are very appealing. Secondly, they also include transgender couples in the show and other minorities. For example, there's a story about a woman of short stature, and that is not what you typically see. So people can see themselves in this show. So anyway, I think it is educational. It shows that not everybody has to be a beautiful, Bridgerton model-like person in order to be sexy and sensual. And it talks about all the vicissitudes of, love and lust and trust and breaking up and getting back together. Makeup sex is a very sexy thing, by the way. And of course, affairs. There is no competing with affairs when it comes to lust. And as we try to teach our patients who are in long-term relationships about the fact that they are at a disadvantage in that you have the same old, which is why Sheryl says Outlander maybe works for her. You have to work at romance and passion in long-term relationships, and it's an unfair advantage that an affair has, because an affair where it's going to be at a 5-star hotel, and you're going to be at your sexiest and your best, and it's short-lived, and it's not real life.
God, it sounds like The Bachelorette.
Oh yeah, I know, Patty. There's a Golden Bachelor now. You want to apply?
Ooh. A what?
There's a Golden Bachelor. There's a bachelor who's 71, and all the bachelorettes have to be over 65.
Which is better than having all the bachelorettes under 30 for this 75-year-old. It's nice that they would be also.
This show is going to be an interesting. We got to follow this, but you're right. The lust, the love, lesbian, the affairs. I have so many people coming into my office, and they're like, "Okay, Dr. Iglesia, I'm the adulteress," and they're feeling guilty about it, and at the same time, they want the whole workup that goes along with this. But the shame that sometimes that people have afterwards. I know you see this, Cheryl, but. It's an interesting, there's so much we can talk about on this.
Well, Patty and I actually did a podcast on affairs and why they happen, and can relationships survive an affair, which they can, but you have to learn from it and grow from it and understand what was the setup that caused the problem. And sometimes we can prevent it if we can educate our patients that this is about learning that long-term relationships take a lot of work to maintain romance and passion. It is not, there is nothing wrong with the relationship if they have to work at it. That is the way it goes.
And you're so right about that, because, as you were speaking, there were so many things going through my head. Like, why does anybody ever think that just because you have a piece of paper that bound you doesn't mean it's going to be there for a lifetime? It means the work really starts at that time. It really starts.
Well, that's the problem. problem is that if you get so bored, we get bored in the bedroom. We get bored because the romance is out of it, and that does take a lot of work. Cheryl, I heard a thing where someone said if you put a jar of jelly beans and had all the jelly beans for how many times you had sex before you got actually like committed, and then you took one jelly bean out for every time you actually had relations after, you would never finish the bowl would never be empty.
And we're asking ourselves, why do we stray? Why do we go different? Why do we look at the shiny penny? So, all right, I'm going to start here. And I'm just going to say one of my very favorite ones that I watched, and the one that I think I'm starting off with because I was a little perplexed with this. Let me just tell you what it was. It was Sex Life. And the main character was named Billy. And Billy had this unbelievable, crazy sex life with her first lover, and his name was Brad. But Brad and her couldn't maintain that relationship. She ended up ending that relationship, and she married the good boy, who I think he was an attorney. His name was Cooper. They had the beautiful white house with the picket fence, but all she could ever, and they had 2 children, I think a boy and a girl, so how perfect is that? And then all she kept thinking about was the sex life that she had with Brad. She was constantly fantasizing about what her life was like with him, and she started to missing him, and then it became kind of a stalking thing. What I'm going to do is, Dr. Kingsberg, I'm going to start with you. Do you find that a lot of women fantasize about their old lovers?
Yes, people fantasize about old lovers in many ways, and people fantasize, period, sometimes about total strangers when they're sort of either masturbating or in a sexual encounter with somebody else. If they are with a partner, it is really something that I try to focus them on staying present, more of a mindfulness thing. But fantasy is absolutely typical and normal. Interestingly, as you describe, I've not seen the show, but as you describe her, first of all, she needs to be in therapy, and she really really does. And what she is longing for is the passion and the excitement. And I will say to people all the time, that when you choose, when sex is good in a relationship, it's good, and when it's bad, it is inordinately bad. But good sex is not enough to maintain a long-term relationship, because you probably have great lovers in your past, but they are not worthy partners. There's no capacity to have a mature, sort of grown-up life. That either they're not capable of being a good parent, or they're going to cheat, or they're just not stable, right? But that doesn't mean that they're not great, exciting lovers. I mean, who wouldn't want some, bipolar crazy person to sweep them off their feet? That is charming and seductive, but they are not the person you want to grow old with. You want to fantasize about them, but would not be good partners. And in my practice all the time, I see women who long for that seductive narcissist who is charming and good looking and suave, and the worst partner in the world for a long-term relationship. So yes, I would say it is a tough call to have to sort of move to a more mature relationship, and you kind of long for that. But when I focus them on, would they be a good partner? Because they start to regret, and in your case, apparently stalk, but would they regret that and say, I should never have left that great sex? No, they should have. And what they need to do is incorporate some of that fun and passion and teach good old Cooper how to be a little bit of a sexier lover.
She tried to do that, but that went south too. So,
well, he needs therapy too.
Yeah.
Cheryl, I love that. I think everyone could benefit from therapy in so many ways. But I stumbled upon this show, and I actually don't watch that much. And I loved this show. I almost binge watched it one weekend. But Billy is so relatable, I think, to so many women, because she's doing the day in, day out. It's like raising the kids, working, taking care of everyone else. She's kind of exhausted. I mean, the first few episodes, she's, dealing with a newborn. And her outlet is, her journal, and typing about her very sexy and fun sexual relationships of the past. And of course, it wouldn't be a good drama if the main guy wasn't totally handsome, which he is. But what I love actually about this show is that it, again, just like Sheryl said, it's normalizing fantasy. It normalizes reliving great sexual experiences. And just like Sheryl said, I think a lot of women do choose the mature route, meaning the person that's stable and has a good job and is responsible and going to be a good parent. But that doesn't make women not want the fun, dopamine rush, pleasure seeking, cowboy type guy that is exciting and passionate. So it shows both sides. And I think Billy is extremely relatable, although of course she's absolutely gorgeous as well. So little Hollywood.
That brings me to my next one. Nielsen, which is the TV rating company, has found that Americans watch shows and characters that they can relate to. Shows like Sex Life are extremely popular with women who are like in their 40s and 50s. I'm going to just ask the panel, why do you think this is?
Because when you're in your midlife, in your 40s and 50s, the children have grown. You may now be taking care of aging parents, so you're sort of sandwiched. You yourself are going through, I'm talking women, the perimenopause. And so there are changes that are happening to the body. And the men themselves are also changing and aging. Let's face it, with the erectile dysfunction and all the drugs, we have, 50% of men in their 50s have erectile dysfunction. We're dealing with that too. So what I'm trying to say is I think it's nice for these shows to show that, if this is kind of normal aging, you can bring that excitement back. But in general, people are bored. They're just bored stiff, and they're looking for something new and exciting. And so I think shows, like Outlander, House of Cards was another one, showing these racy sex scenes, and Bridgerton. I think that it just sort of revs up the juices a bit for people who are kind of bored at home and can't really get out of what's happening to their own physiology and their own body, maybe a little bit regret. Cheryl, what do you think?
Well, I think it's soap operas on steroids.
Yeah.
That, we have been watching these, romantic, mysteries and the chase and, since Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore were sleeping in twin beds. But
Lucy and Ricky too.
That's right. But so, even when our social standards wouldn't allow for anything that was at all racy, we have wanted that. We have longed for that. So now we are able to have it way more explicit. And so sometimes explicit can, sort of make it too real. And sometimes it allows for the normalization that says, simultaneous orgasms really aren't likely, right? That people aren't going to sort of lustfully fall into bed and within 5 minutes with barely breaking a sweat have simultaneous orgasms. That just is not what real life is. But it is a little sexy and romantic, and it is the difference between what is fantasy and what what is the ideal that Christine, you were talking about, the idealized, and what is real. And Patty, you were saying, how do we explain this to our children? We talk about the fact that romance and fantasy, Cinderella, that's all sort of fantasy life and romanticized, where Prince Charming comes and finds you. that's a wonderful story, but that's a story.
Story.
Then,
I've looked for my white horse and my prince my whole life and never got it. So,
So you created your own.
I got a pumpkin.
yeah, well, like that didn't go so well either. So let's get that back straight. So I think all of those stories, I refuse to read any of that craziness to my granddaughters. You know. Anyway, that's my personal stuff. I got to keep that out of there. So I do think that these shows feel like a guilty pleasure when we do watch this alone. Could watching this with your partner build better communication and a stronger relationship together? What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I think doing anything together, by the way, is good. Just staring at a screen without discussion isn't necessarily going to enhance communication, but tons of couples use erotic, visuals to enhance their sexual lives. But what you also want, to your point about does it improve the relationship? Well, as we talked about the fact that long-term relationships need to work at spicing things up, add whatever you need to spice it up. And so whether it's a visual erotica or reading something or, fantasizing, it is great to change things up and to talk about it. Patty, we were just talking about, BDSM and whether couples engage in that and how normalized that has become as just something different, as long as there's consent and nobody's harmed, and that also is about communication. You have to talk before you engage in anything like that. So yes, as long as it improves the communication and you're looking at each other in your eyes and having that conversation, it can be really helpful.
So I'm glad you brought up BDSM, because I think another popular book and then movie was 50 Shades of Grey. That was like, I think everyone about 10 years ago was knows in that book, and then couldn't wait for the movie to come out. But again, it normalized it, brought it to the forefront, and I think was very, very steamy for sure.
It was very steamy. And there was, we couldn't keep products on our shelves. So,
yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back. You started into something that I wanted to kind of pull you out of, because this pertains to our youth. So over the summers, when my girls are coming home from college, my granddaughters are coming home, I always have them make a list of things that when we're on vacation or, when they come over and spend the night at my house, shows that we can watch together. And so we enjoyed watching Sex Education and Bridgerton, and a lot of those shows, for example, we watched together. Do you think that this is a good thing for parents, grandparents, to be able to sit down instead of them learning from their peers? Because I would rather have that open dialogue. Like if I see something steamy, sexy, like people having the best sex ever, I want to say, it's not like that, right? I want to be able to have that conversation with them. And so they know that, that relationship, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of communication. And in the beginning, everything looks like that, but it doesn't always last like that. So do you think that's healthy, or am I crazy?
Patty, I'm just gonna say I wish I had a grandmother like you when I was growing up. Life would have been so much more spicy. But right. Well, I have a teenage daughter, so I can share my experience. We have watched Never Have I Ever, which is on Netflix. It's I think a very cute coming of age story about a teenage Indian American girl.
I love it.
Sexual development. It's TV 14, so it's not R. There's nothing explicit. There are sexual conversations and topics, but nothing is, explicit. And again, I'm all about normalization, and this show normalizes all the various confusing, emotional relationship issues in high school and life, and very diverse characters, and they do a good job at character development as well. And then it touches on culture, right? Which I think we overlook culture as a source or an issue sometimes in sexual dysfunction, and it explores homosexuality and a lot of other themes. And I think it would be great for other parents to watch this with their children, because again, just like you said, it's a way to facilitate conversation. It's a way to, through other people's examples, to have discussions, because like you said, knowledge is power. And if you're not going to give it to them, they're going to find it through their peers or online or some other place that's, you don't have control of anything. The sex education, I think that show, again, as far as the education piece in that show, I think it's by far the best that we have out there, just for the diversity of the high school students. But I think this needs a little parental guidance and probably more appropriate for late teens or young adults, just because there are more sexually explicit content. And I think, I think we all want to like protect our children. And I know I have this, it's like this balance between how much do I tell them and how much do I prepare them for, and what are they mature for. And every child, I think there's a different time that they're mature and ready for things. But I'm semi-terrified because I feel like my daughter's gone from like tween to like a woman in like 1 year. And it's kind of terrifying to me. It's like happens like this. And I know I need to actually even do more to make sure that she has good understanding education about sex. I highly recommend sex education as the bottom line, and
you brought up a point, Never Have I Ever. I think that is a great show. Like, I challenge my boys. I have 3 sons and a daughter, and I challenge my boys to watch some of these shows and have an open dialogue with their child. Nick, for instance, has a daughter that is 13, and she's asking a lot of questions right now. And her mom's in the medical field. She's great at asking, but Nick, you have to be prepared as well. So I challenged him to watch Never Have I Ever, and he got hooked on it. He loved the show. He said, "This is really a lot of great information." I think this. Do you guys think that this is a healthy conversation and a way to approach what healthy sex looks like? As a parent, to watch some of these beforehand so you can communicate with your child before you even watch it together?
Well, yes, I think you should always preview because you really need to know. But can I say that this kind of gets to the same topic as contraception, and that the word, that the whole, old message that poor, Jocelyn Elders got reamed for was that, if you talk about contraception, if you talk about sex, you are going to promote your child being sexual. And that is not at all the case. That is not what the data would suggest at all. It is informing them and educating them and protecting them, and to think that it puts ideas in their head that you really think your 13-year-old hasn't thought about sex before. But it is so helpful to educate them and to guide them in the right direction, to otherwise lead them blind. Talk about the blind leading the blind. It is absolutely helpful, and to be able to feel comfortable with your parent or your grandparent watching a show and talking about it, and not just, as Sheryl probably does with her mother, putting her head down and saying, I can see, in our generation, it was a little embarrassing because our parents, we didn't think of them as being sexual beings. We know that that is not the case, but that was not how we grew up thinking. So thank you, Patty, for doing that with your grandkids and for making sure your son's doing that with his daughter.
But, the education, and again, I haven't watched sex education, but I want to say 2 things, because it is right now the start of school and high school and colleges. And this period of time is, there have been documentaries on this called The Hunting Ground. I think one of them, that 1 out of 4 women in America has been a victim of sexual assault, whether, and if they're drugged or out, they're made drunk or whatever, and things happen, and very few of these cases get prosecuted because of all these cover-ups, the full extent of the law. It is extremely important, not just about contraception, but about, what is healthy and what is not. So if these shows are going to educate men and women, and if these shows are going to be in a way that are, comedy is great because, within comedy there's truth, but there's also less judgment and that kind of a way to be able to talk about. I think this is important. This particular time of year when everyone's going off to the colleges, I'm sure there's a lot of angst amongst parents, and rightly so. So yeah, the more education, the better in Patty. So yeah, I think it's important. And sex therapy for older couples, if this is to watch these shows together, if that's a way of bringing people together, really recognize that there are some issues that you should see someone about. That's important too. Another way to educate. Couples therapy. I love it.
Do you think there's any danger of misinformation from sex depicted in movies or TVs that show that you may portray sex in a negative or a harmful way?
I think Sheryl touched on that already, but I was going to echo this very topic, which is, most sexual content is focused on the cisgender penetrative sex, mutual orgasm within minutes. It's so Hollywood. It's not reality. And I think it's psychologically, and maybe Sheryl can touch on too, damaging to women because they think like if they can't do that maybe there's something wrong with them and they fall short. But women need the foreplay. They need the sexual tension. They need the romance. They need the time to produce vaginal lubrication. They need specific stimulation, usually the clitoris. And each woman, has their own erogenous zones that lead to pleasurable sexual encounter. And it's not almost never how it's portrayed in the big screen. So, there's such also wide diversity, right, of pleasurable sexual experiences. It's not just vagina and penis penetrative.
Exactly.
It's which I wish, more shows focused on. I'm glad we're highlighting a few. And I'd love to hear more from Sheryl about this.
Well, I love that you brought that up because the image and the fantasy and the misinformation that women are supposed to be easily orgasmic with penetration, especially when they're pushed up against a wall, that just is not physiologically the reality. But it is. So many women worry because I see this all the time. My husband says there's something wrong with me because I'm not orgasmic with intercourse. I'm like, you are in the norm, right? And that you need to find other ways and explain to him there's nothing wrong with you. But that is what what those images portray, that women are supposed to be heterosexual. They're supposed to want to be taken. So Patty, to your point about showing empowering women, it'd be nice to see more women in more of a dominant role of seduction and not always just being the passive, woman who's sort of swept off her feet.
But we do need to balance where a lot of people learn about sex from in pornography and the pedophilia and violence against women that's portrayed in. That is just it's I think it's epidemic. It's really unfortunate. So having some opportunities for making things educational that are also more empowering and is helpful. But I feel a little bit concerned about the images that women are seeing in pornography and my whole passion about what the vulva should look like, and these images in porn magazines and photoshopped images and all that stuff. It's a disservice to women.
Cheryl, I love that because I can't remember which show I saw this in, but to your point about pornography, it was late high school, early college kids, and they're at a party, and they go upstairs to a bedroom, and the the male starts doing what he's seen in porn, right? Which is just take, be aggressive, whatever. And the female just right across slaps him in the face, like, what are you doing? Where did you learn this? Like, this is not how you do anything. And it was so actually female empowering. It touches on your point, if we don't educate, parents, etc., podcasts, education, they're going to find it on the internet and they're going to find it in porn. And we need to have other places for them to look, which is these shows, I think.
I think you guys touched on earlier about getting your, I think there's a way to get your daughter's son ready for high school. And I think there's a way to get your son and daughter, granddaughter, grandson ready for college as well. And maybe we need a checkoff list at the Patty Brisbane Foundation.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
I think that it's important because I see a lot of these, I helped Tao move into her sorority house a couple weeks ago. And I couldn't, the conversations that, they didn't even know that I was there and who I was. It was just that they would come running in. So what happened this summer? Did you spending time with your grandma? What did she tell you? I mean, these kids are hungry for information, and not information that's coming from a show or a book, or they want to hear it. They want it coming out. And I know
I think we should invite the students and ask their questions, right? And men and women.
That's a good one.
Definitely.
Yeah, accurate information. There's a huge need for accuracy.
Let's just do a whole something on social media, live.
I think you're absolutely right, because I don't want them. I wouldn't want any one of my grandchildren to hear anything from their peers. We need to empower them with knowledge. And I think that in education, that is the most important.
They should send in their questions beforehand, because some of them may not want to be, asking it, but just someone has asked this question, or a question that we often hear, and we read it, and then people can chime in. But I think that's great. We need to.
Yeah. There we go. We got another one going. So that'll be a fun one, by the way. Last question. Any final thoughts on sexual content in the media?
I would
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Cheryl.
No. I just would like it more real and more diverse, and let people see that most of us are not runway models, and that is not what beauty needs to be defined as. And so I just would like sexy to not necessarily be some sort of very narrowed image of what sexy is, whether it's the vulva, Sheryl, or whether it's the entire body. Have people of all sizes, shapes, races, you name it, all genders and orientations. So that would be a diverse image of what would be real, and giving accurate information, and not be afraid of teaching children the right information. The fact that sex education is now vilified and that books are being banned is just, don't get me started on that. That is just so crazy. And it does children a disservice. It is not helpful for a small group that is offended to control how we allow good education for our kids.
Definitely. I definitely think we need more diversity. I also think we need to involve the religious community in some sense, because I think there was a series on Orthodox Jewish and some, to be quite honest, that
was unorthodox, and that was such a good show about vaginismus. It was really good.
That's unorthodox. And I get caught in this sometimes. You know me, I'll say anything, but I'll be talking about all this stuff, and then they're like, well, Dr. Iglesia, I'm not married. Or religion. I had a Muslim couple, I'm talking about going down. They're like, religion. I I do think that there will be a lot of people who have religious beliefs that want to get some accurate information, because there's a lot of unorthodox and also misinformation out there. So somehow that would be an interesting read to see more about a little diversity on that side in terms of the religious beliefs.
Yes,
I 100% agree with the diversity and accuracy of information. I hope that happens. And I would just like to, for all the listeners, maybe their parents, grandparents, whatever, just to challenge them after this podcast to make a list of maybe shows that they're going to start watching with their loved ones. Don't wait, because I think parents always think like, if I just don't talk about it, maybe it won't happen, right? They're just hoping that somehow their child or grandchild is going to get accurate information somewhere from someone else.
And praying.
They're doing this. Don't
right.
let it be me. I don't want it to be me.
No.
I don't want to give that.
So just have the uncomfortable talk. Do it soon after you previewed some of these shows, because it is of most importance for our generations.
And I challenge both sexes, the mom, the dad, the grandfather, the grandmother. I challenge all of them to get educated and empowered to help our next generations with this information. I want to thank my guests. God, you guys are great. And Dr. Cheryl Iglesia and Dr. Christine Vaccaro and Dr. Sheryl Kingsberg for a great conversation. And if you liked what you heard today, please rate and subscribe to our podcast. For more information on the Patty Brisbane Foundation for Women's Sexual Health and our focus areas, visit the PattyBrisbaneFoundation.org. Remember, sex care is self-care and sexual health matters.